Good morning, everyone. Today we're talking about gratitude. And gratitude for me is not just being thankful for what we have, but acknowledging our abundances and sharing them with others. Knowing that we get from when we give, and true gratitude is sharing with one another. And so I wanted to share this Ghanaian story called 7 Spools of Thread that speaks to that transition of focusing on me to focusing on we. So in a small village in Ghana, there lived an old man, Ashanti, and his 7 sons. Their skin was as smooth and dark as the finest mahogany wood, and their limbs were as strong and straight as a warrior's spears. And yet, from morning until night, their small home was filled with the sounds of the brothers quarreling. Now, as soon as the sun brought forth a new day, the brothers began to argue. They argued all morning about how to tend to the crops. They argued all afternoon about the weather, and they argued all evening about when to return home. And so it would continue. At mealtime, the young men argued until the stew was cold and the fufu was hard, and in fact, it was often morning by the time the brothers had finished eating. And their father did not know what to do. As it happened, one day the old man died, and the next morning the village chief brought the 7 Ashanti brothers to him and said, "Your father has left an inheritance." And before they could begin to argue over who deserved it more, the chief stopped them. "Now your father has decreed that all of his property and possessions will be divided equally among you. But first," the chief explained, "before the moon rises tonight, you must learn how to make gold out of these spools of silk thread." And the brothers each received a spool of thread, blue, red, yellow, orange, green, white, and black. And for once, the brothers were speechless. "From this moment on, you must not argue amongst yourselves or raise a hand in anger to one another. If you do, your father's property and possessions will be divided equally among the poorest of the villagers, and you will be turned out. Now go." And the brothers bowed to the chief and hurried away. When the 7 Ashanti brothers returned home, something unusual happened. They sat side by side, without saying anything unkind to one another. And then they took each other's hands and held one another tightly. And for the first time in years, peace rested within the walls of their home. And then they traded ideas over how to turn each spool into gold, until one son suggested that they weave the thread together and make a cloth of many colors and sell it in the marketplace. And they realized they could finish faster if they worked together, and so the 7 Ashanti brothers cut the wood to make a loom and then took turns weaving cloth out of their spools of thread. And they made a pattern of stripes and shapes that looked like the wings of birds. And they used all the colors: blue, red, yellow, orange, green, black, and white. And soon the brothers had several pieces of beautiful multicolored cloth. When the cloth was finished, the 7 brothers took turns neatly folding the brightly colored fabric, and then they placed it into 7 baskets and put the baskets on their heads and hurried down the long, dusty road as quickly as they could. When they reached the marketplace, they unfolded a bolt and held it up for all to see. The multicolored fabric glistened like a rainbow, and a crowd gathered around the 7 brothers. Suddenly, a man dressed in magnificent robes pushed his way to the front of the crowd, and everyone stepped back, for it was the king's treasurer. He fingered the cloth, and then he held it up to the sunlight. And then he untied his bag and spelled out pieces of gold for the brothers. Now the 7 Ashanti brothers ran out of the marketplace and back down the road to the village. "Oh, chief," said the oldest, "we have turned the thread into gold." And the chief came out of his hut and sat upon a stool. "Have you argued or fought today?" asked the chief. "No, my chief," said the youngest. "We've been too busy working together to argue or fight." "Then you have learned the lesson your father sought to teach you," said the chief, "and all that he had is now yours." The older brothers smiled happily, but the youngest still looked sad. "But wait, what about the poor people in the village?" he asked. "Now we have received an inheritance, but what will they do?" "Perhaps," said the oldest, "we can teach them how to turn thread into gold." And the chief smiled. "You have indeed learned your lesson well." And the 7 Ashanti brothers taught their people carefully. And the village became famous for its beautiful multicolored cloth, and the villagers prospered. And from that day until this, the 7 Ashanti brothers have worked together farming the land, and they have worked peacefully in honor of their father. Now, gratitude is not just loving what exists now, but working towards making the world a better place. So work together, care for one another, and be thankful for what you can give to others.